John here from Ripewave Audio, and for this video we're going to talk about these Emotiva XPA-DR2 Gen 3 amplifiers, which we just purchased as to be a permanent addition to our home theater reference system. And while we do this, we're going to talk about our plan and how we got here. Now, we're currently at a 7.2.4 system, but until getting these last 4 channels of amplification, we've been short on having external amplifiers to fully power this. So what we've been doing is starting with the 3 Emotiva monoblocks that we have up front for the front channels. We have our old vintage Sony TAN 9000 ES 5-channel amplifier, which we've been using for the side and rear surrounds. And for the 4 height channels, we've been using from the Marantz Cinema 50 4 of its amplifier channels. Now the problem with that is for using our processors in our reviews, like the RMC1, which is a permanent addition to our theater, we are unable to really fully shake that out unless we have a total of 11 external amplifiers, or even 13 if we want to do front wides, but at least starting with the 11 for the 7.2.4 configuration is really where we want to be. Now the .2 we have is the 2 rhythmic F18 subwoofers that we have in the front right and rear left parts of the room, and those fill out the bass. But as far as the bed layer channels, my vision for this is, since we've started with XPA-1 differential reference monoblocks, I'd like to keep that differential reference all through those bed layers as much as possible to make it as consistent as possible. And the other thing we've done for consistency is we're using Polk speakers all the way around for timbre matching, not just the bed layers, but the height channels are all Polk, top-of-the-line Polk speakers from multiple generations, but they're very close on their timbre matching. But we wanted to keep that consistency at the bed layer. When we bought the monoblocks, the Gen 3s were already getting to be introduced. What Emotiva did was they started to put the Gen 2 on closeout, and we took advantage of that. And that's what got us involved with Emotiva, was those purchase of those original 3 monoblocks on closeout, and that was a very good deal for us. And they've served us really well, and so I thought, well, if I can keep that consistency up. Now granted, I'm not going to do monoblocks on the rear side surrounds and rear surrounds, but maybe 2 channels, because they don't make a 4-channel differential reference. Now they have the other XPA parts of the XPA series that could give me 4 or more channels, but they wouldn't be differential reference. And what Emotiva does to get differential reference on the Gen 3, they use 2 of the 7 slots available for each channel, and that's how they double up to get that differential reference mode there. Now with the Gen 2, there wasn't slots. It was you bought this as configured. They didn't get to that modular approach until Gen 3. So let's compare these on paper. The XPA-1 Gen 2s are a Class A/AB amplifier. I can switch this from a Class A mode. I think it does up to 60 watts of Class A, and then it switches over. It will give you 600 watts into 8 ohms or 1,000 watts into 4 ohms. And these Polk speakers do dip down to 4 ohm, so we kind of like having all that extra headroom. I never felt that the Sony TAN 9000 ES gave me enough oomph to really drive these Polk speakers. It was always lacking until I got these monoblocks. The XPA-1 monoblocks put out a signal to noise of 117 dBs, but these are heavy and they put out a lot of heat, especially if you run them in Class A mode. They're 73 pounds or 33.1 kilograms. Now when you look to something like the DR2, which is a 2-channel amplifier for the Gen 3, these are entirely Class AB, so there's no switching over to Class A to begin with. The power supply is different. It's a switch mode power supply, And the rails on these are in a Class H topology that can switch over when more power is needed. So a little different than the construction of these monoblocks that I've been used to. Now the power on these DR2s is lower than what we get on the monoblocks. It's 550 watts into 8 ohms versus 600. But if you're going into 4 ohm speakers, it's 800 watts instead of 1,000. The signal to noise on these is actually better. It's rated at 122 decibels versus 117. But they are much lighter, 42.5 pounds versus 73, and 19.3 kilograms versus 33.1 kilograms. So some differences there. We're not expecting as much power output, but a greater signal-to-noise ratio. So I can't wait to compare these. So what this means, us being Ripewave Audio, we're not going to simply place these at the back of the room where we have this all pre-wired for to take on the side surrounds and the rear surrounds. No, we're going to initially test these at the front of the room using our AB amplifier switch from Duke Audio, and we're going to switch between the Gen 2 monoblocks and the DR2 Gen 3s and see how different they are using the same RMC1 processor and the same source material, and find out what these really sound like. So that will be a great comparison. Tell you a little bit more about what you get out of the box with these. Of course, you get the Emotiva birth certificate. You get labels for wiring for your cables. So that's a nice touch. And you get your Gen 3 manual. Although I've read this online, I haven't looked at the printed version yet. I don't expect any surprises on this. And you get a much larger binding post, 5-way binding post, than you did on the Gen 2. One thing I noticed difference is on the power supply. It's 2-prong versus 3-prong, and the cable, of course, instead of being having that ground pin, is, I think, a little bit narrower in gauge than what we have in the Gen 2. So a little difference there. We got a little circuit breaker button on the back of the unit, and you do have a selector between whether you're going to use unbalanced or balanced connections. We're going to use balanced because we have the RMC1, and but it's nice to have that flexibility if we wanted to hook something up that's unbalanced. The other neat thing is we can connect all these up with a trigger, and is nothing more satisfying to me than able to hit one button and have everything turn on at once in sequence. And I find that quite fun. Now, instead of having a power meter on the front of these, as the monoblocks did for Gen 2, these units, like most of the Emotiva amplifiers, only have a status LED for each channel. So these, each being a stereo amplifier, have 2 LEDs which have the color of blue when they're operating normally. Now when the Gen 3 came out, the big switch between the Gen 2 and the Gen 3 was moving from a toroidal power supply, which accounts for a lot of the extra weight, to the switch mode power supply. And whether that would sound as good, was Emotiva cheapening the unit by moving to a switch mode power supply? So as part of our testing here, it's going to be interesting if we notice a difference. I'll give you some initial feedback on how these sound, and I've only got a few hours into this. While these sound very similar when I'm doing my AB and switching back and forth with using the Duke Audio between the amplifiers, they have a similar characteristic. But I went into this thinking that it may have less power. Maybe they sound as good. Maybe they're a little less than a monoblock. How can I expect these to sound as good as a monoblock? That was my preconceived notion. But I'll tell you what, these sound a bit clearer and a bit livelier, which was a pleasant surprise. I almost hate to put these at the back of the room for the surrounds, but just the way I have this laid out, it's going to be difficult for me to use these on my front channels because I got 4 versus 3, so the numbers just don't match up. So I'll probably end up using in the back of the room, even though I think they're slightly better than my monoblocks. So great job, Emotiva, on that. And of course, we're going to continue to dig deeper. We're going to do some measurements and find out really, if my initial impressions hold up. So what are your thoughts on this plan and what we're doing? This is going to enable us to bring in more processors that are capable of doing 7.2.4 and compare them side by side. And I think that's the best way to get an honest review on these products is those side-by-side comparisons. How would you go about this? Do you think I'm going about this the right way? What do you think of these Emotiva amps? There's other choices out there. The Class D amps, of course, I'm very excited about, but I just doing this for consistency. Someday I'll bring in some Class D and we'll compare them and we'll use the same side-by-side comparisons. But this is setting us up with a common reference for all 11 channels. So your feedback would be very helpful. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you want to take your involvement to the next level, consider joining our Patreon at www.patreon.com/Ripewave. And you can always hit that thanks button and do a one-time donation. But in any case, be sure to hit that bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.